Manipulators are students of human weakness, and they are extraordinarily skilled at what they do. But there are 7 responses so fundamentally disruptive to how manipulation works that they leave even the most practiced manipulator with nowhere to go, and understanding why reveals something profound about the hidden mechanics of power itself. Most people believe that the appropriate response to manipulation is confrontation, that exposing the manipulator, arguing against their tactics, or demonstrating that their approach has been recognized, is the most effective way to neutralize what they are doing. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, however intuitive it feels, plays directly into the manipulator's hands. Every confrontation is engagement, and engagement, in any form, at any emotional temperature, is exactly what the manipulative system requires to function. The manipulator's tactical architecture is not built around winning arguments. It is built around generating reactions. The specific content of the reaction matters far less than its existence, because every reaction provides data, every emotional display reveals a pressure point, and every defensive response confirms that the provocation reached its intended target. The manipulator does not need you to agree with them. They need you to respond. And the moment you do, with anger, with explanation, with defense, with the visible distress of someone who has been successfully provoked, you have provided the raw material their next move will be constructed from. Few people understand that the refusal to react is not passivity. It is, in terms of disrupting a manipulative dynamic, the most active position available. It provides nothing. No emotional data to exploit, no behavioral signal to calibrate against, no confirmation that the provocation landed where it was aimed. Power rarely announces itself, and the power of a genuine non-reaction is visible in what it does to the manipulator's sequencing. Their tactic was the first move in a sequence that assumed a specific second move from you. When that second move does not arrive, the sequence cannot advance. And a sequence that cannot advance forces the manipulator into improvisation, which is precisely the condition under which their tactical sophistication is most reduced, and their actual intentions are most likely to become visible. This is where the strategic question completes what the non-reaction begins. Because silence alone, however disorienting, leaves the interaction in a suspended state. The strategic question resolves the suspension in the most tactically favorable direction available by moving the manipulator from the offensive position their approach was designed to occupy into a position they are structurally unprepared for. The position of having to answer. Most people believe that questions are requests for information. Those who understand human nature know that questions are also, in the right circumstances, instruments of positional reversal. The manipulator who deployed an accusation, a provocation, or a reframe designed to place you in a defensive position suddenly finds themselves facing a calm, specific question that requires them to either answer honestly, which would contradict the manipulation, or deflect in ways that reveal the absence of substance beneath the tactic. The wisest leaders recognize that asking the right question in the right moment is almost always more powerful than providing the right answer. Answers resolve tension, questions redirect it, and in a dynamic where the manipulator controls the tension, the ability to redirect it is the ability to control the dynamic. There is a response to provocation that most people never consider, not because it requires exceptional intelligence to produce, but because it violates every instinct that provocation is designed to activate. It does not defend. It does not explain. It does not counter, argue, or produce evidence of its own case. It agrees. Most people believe that agreement with an accusation or a criticism is concession, that it signals the weakness of one's position and invites further attack. Those who understand human nature know that this belief is precisely what the manipulator is counting on. The accusation was not designed to be accurate. It was designed to be destabilizing, to activate the target's defensive instincts, to redirect their energy from clear perception of what is happening toward the urgent task of proving the accusation wrong, and to position the manipulator as the evaluating party whose standards the target must meet in order to escape the accusation's grip. The unexpected agreement removes all of this in a single response. When the target agrees calmly, without visible distress, without the accompanying performance of someone who has genuinely been struck by a difficult truth, something happens to the accusation's architecture that the manipulator was never prepared for. The emotional charge it was carrying has nowhere to go. The defensiveness it was designed to produce has not appeared. The position of evaluating authority the manipulator assumed by deploying it has been gently but completely vacated, because there is nothing to evaluate when the subject has already agreed. What the manipulator is left holding is a tactic that has discharged without hitting its intended target, and a discharged weapon in the hands of someone who was counting on its use leaves them in a position of unexpected exposure. Few people understand how much of manipulation's power exists in the gap between what is said and the target's reaction to it. Remove the reaction, and the gap closes. The accusation becomes simply a statement, unremarkable, unresonant, and requiring no further management from either party. The strongest position is often one of genuine indifference to what was designed to wound. This connects directly to the principle of behavioral consistency, which may be the most strategically durable of all the responses available to someone navigating a manipulative environment. Manipulators depend on variability. They require the target's behavior to shift based on the specific approach being deployed, to soften under certain kinds of pressure, to harden under others, to reveal different vulnerabilities in different emotional states. The entire adaptation process through which manipulators refine their approach to a specific target depends on receiving different data from different tactics. A target whose behavior remains consistent across every tactic, every escalation, and every social context provides something the adaptation process cannot work with: a stable, unchanging surface. Most people believe that consistency is simply the product of character. Those who understand human nature know that in the context of navigating manipulation, behavioral consistency is a strategic achievement, one that requires the specific discipline of not allowing your response to be determined by the sophistication or intensity of the approach being aimed at you. The wisest leaders recognize that this discipline is not natural. It must be developed, and its development requires a particular quality of self-knowledge, the ability to observe your own reactive patterns with sufficient clarity to recognize when they are being deliberately activated and to decline the activation, not through suppression but through the kind of grounded internal stability that simply does not require the interaction to go a certain way in order to remain intact. History has shown that the most formidable opponents in any adversarial dynamic, political, organizational, personal, were consistently those whose behavior other parties found impossible to predict, not because they were erratic, but because their consistency was so complete that no specific tactic could produce a differentiated response from them. Consistency of this quality is not rigidity. It is the behavioral expression of an internal position so stable that external pressure cannot find a surface to deform. There is a form of communication that most people experience as uncomfortable, a gap in conversation that produces an almost physical pressure to be filled, a silence that feels like an accusation, an emptiness that seems to demand resolution from whoever can tolerate it least. Most people cannot tolerate it for long, and manipulators know this with extraordinary precision. The silence that requires no explanation is not simply the absence of speech. It is the presence of something, a quality of settled internal authority that communicates through the simple refusal to fill available conversational space, that the person maintaining it is operating from a position that does not require the interaction to proceed on any particular timeline in order to remain stable. Most people believe that silence in charged interactions signals uncertainty, that the person who does not immediately respond to a provocation, an accusation, or a manipulative reframe is either struggling to formulate a response or has been successfully destabilized by what was directed at them. Those who understand human nature know that this assumption is the manipulator's most reliable false premise, and that exploiting it requires only the willingness to allow the silence to persist beyond the point where most people would have broken it. The mechanics of this are straightforward once the principle is understood. The manipulator deploys a statement designed to produce a response. The silence that follows places the entire weight of the unresolved interaction on the person who created the need for resolution, which is always the person who deployed the provocation. If no response arrives, the manipulator must manage the silence themselves. And a manipulator managing silence they did not intend to create is a manipulator who has moved from the offensive position they designed the interaction to occupy into a position of reactive management they never anticipated. Pay attention to what this reveals. The silence does not argue. It does not expose. It does not require the target to demonstrate anything about their position or their character. It simply persists. And in persisting, it communicates something that all the careful construction of a verbal response could not communicate with the same efficiency. That whatever was aimed here did not land. Few people understand that the manipulator's most significant tactical vulnerability is their dependence on receiving a response. Every approach they deploy was designed with a specific response in mind, and the sophistication of the approach is entirely calibrated to that anticipated response. Remove the response, and the sophistication has nowhere to apply itself. This is where the named pattern completes what the silence begins. And it is perhaps the most disorienting of all the responses available to someone navigating a manipulative dynamic, precisely because it violates the invisibility that manipulation depends on more fundamentally than any other single tactic. Manipulation operates in the shadow between what is happening and what the target consciously recognizes as happening. Most of the manipulator's sophistication is invested not in the tactics themselves, but in maintaining that shadow, in ensuring that the target experiences each individual manipulation as a specific interaction with specific content, rather than as a recognizable instance of a recurring pattern. The named pattern removes the shadow, not through accusation, not through emotional confrontation, not through the kind of dramatic exposure that allows the manipulator to reframe the response as the target's instability or aggression, but through the calm, specific, and entirely unexcited identification of what is happening, delivered in the same tone one might use to observe the weather. Most people believe that naming a manipulative tactic requires anger to be taken seriously. Those who understand human nature know that naming delivered without emotional charge is considerably more powerful than naming delivered with it, because emotional delivery gives the manipulator something to respond to, something to reframe, something to use as evidence that the target has been destabilized. Calm naming provides none of these things. It simply places the pattern in the visible space between two people, identified specific and entirely free of the emotional charge that would allow the manipulator to redirect attention from the pattern to the target's reaction to it. What appears to be strength is often the performance of strength, and the manipulator, who has just had their tactic named calmly and specifically, is now managing something they were never prepared to manage. A conversation in which the pattern is visible to everyone present. The wisest leaders recognize that the most powerful form of exposure is not dramatic. It is quiet, accurate, and delivered from a position of such evident internal stability that the person receiving it has no available response, that does not somehow confirm what was named, True influence begins when the person across from you realizes that you see exactly what they are doing and that your awareness of it does not appear to disturb you in the slightest. That specific combination, accurate perception, delivered without distress, is the one that a practiced manipulator encounters least often and is least equipped to navigate, because it communicates something about the person deploying it that the manipulator's entire tactical system was designed to prevent the target from ever accessing, the awareness that they were always being seen more clearly than the performance suggested. There is a final principle that operates at a more fundamental level than any of the tactical responses examined so far, because while the refusal to react, the strategic question, the unexpected agreement, the behavioral consistency, the sustained silence, and the named pattern all disrupt the manipulator system from within the interaction, this principle disrupts it by removing something the system requires before the interaction can even begin. The audience. Most people believe that withdrawing from a manipulative dynamic requires a declaration, that the exit must be announced, the reasons explained, the decision communicated in a form that makes the withdrawal legible to the person being withdrawn from. Those who understand human nature know that this belief is itself a form of the manipulator's influence, because the declaration of withdrawal is still a response, still an engagement, still a provision of the one resource that every manipulative performance requires to sustain itself. Attention manipulation is not simply a behavior, it is a performance, and like all performances, it requires an audience to produce its intended effects. The provocations, the accusations, the emotional displays, the manufactured crises, the calculated vulnerabilities, all of these are staged. All of them are directed, and all of them dissolve, not with dramatic opposition, but with the simple, quiet absence of the audience they were staged for. Few people understand that the complete withdrawal of attention, undramatic, unexplained, and total, is the most disorienting experience a manipulative personality can encounter, because there is no response to manage, no reaction to exploit, no emotional signal to recalibrate against. There is simply absence and absence. For a system that was built to run on other people's engagement is not merely inconvenient. It is the one condition the system has no protocol for surviving. Power rarely announces itself, and the withdrawal of power from a dynamic that depended on it rarely announces itself either. It simply stops being available. And what the manipulator discovers in that absence is something no confrontation could have produced as cleanly or as permanently, that the performance had an audience of exactly one, and that audience has found something more worthy of their attention. When you examine the complete architecture of what was revealed across these 7 principles, the non-reaction that removed the emotional data the manipulative system runs on, the strategic question that reversed the positional dynamic the manipulator designed the interaction to maintain, the unexpected agreement that discharged the weapon before it could find its target, the behavioral consistency that presented a surface no tactic could deform, the sustained silence that returned the weight of the interaction to the person who created the need for it, the named pattern that removed the invisibility manipulation depends on, and the withdrawal of audience that eliminated the foundational condition every manipulative performance requires. What becomes visible is not a collection of individual tactics. It is a single, unified philosophy. The manipulator's system was always built on one premise, that you would behave predictably in response to specific pressures, that your emotional reactions could be relied upon, that your need for resolution, for approval, for the discomfort of conflict to end, would consistently override your strategic awareness of what was actually happening. Every principle examined here dismantles a different dimension of that premise. Together, they communicate something to the manipulative system that no single response could communicate as completely. That the premise was wrong. Those who understand human nature know that the most durable protection against manipulation is not superior counter-tactics. It is the development of an internal position so stable, so grounded, and so entirely independent of the interaction's outcome, that the manipulator's system simply cannot find the variability it requires to operate. The greatest mistake is to fight manipulation on its own terms, to respond with emotion to what was designed to provoke emotion, to defend against what was designed to require defense, to engage with what was designed to require engagement. The wisest response is always the one that costs you the least, and the manipulator the most stillness, clarity, the quiet authority of someone who sees exactly what is happening and has already decided it is not worth their reaction. That decision, made consistently and without announcement, is the most powerful position available, and it has never required a single word to communicate.